بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. So my dear brothers and sisters, today we would look at the new chapter or new era in the Islamic history. After migration, historians divide the history of Islam at the time of the Prophet into two major eras. The first is the Meccan era, and this one begins from the time of revelation when the Prophet ﷺ was 40 years. And this era lasted for 13 years, and it's known as the Meccan era. After migration comes the second era, which is the Medinian era, and this one lasted for 10 years. So the total prophethood years, or the total prophethood life of the Prophet ﷺ were 23 years, 13 of them in Mecca, and 10 of them in Medina. And even the Quran, the scholars categorize the verses, the chapters of the Quran as Makki and Madani, meaning that those verses that were revealed before migration are identified as Meccan verses. And those verses that were revealed after revelation are identified as Medinian verses or Medinian chapters. So these two eras had their own issues, their own challenges, and their own accomplishments. And let's do some contrast between these two eras so that hopefully we can have a better appreciation and understanding of the significance and the importance of the incident or the event of migration or hijrah. In Mecca, Muslims were scattered individuals. They were not a community. They were not able to publicly declare their Islam, publicly meet or gather. They were meeting in hiding and in secret, and they were always under fear of being attacked by their enemies in Mecca. Now in Medina, they are a community that can freely worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a community that can publicly meet, a community that makes azan, a community that is is easily identifiable. So the situation between the two is a situation of scattered individuals under the watchful eye of the Meccans, and in Medina, a fully fledged, free, established community. Second difference that we see between the Meccan era and the Medinian era is the fact that in Medina now, they can reach out more. In Mecca, they were constricted, they were limited. And even though there was an opportunity to meet people who come from various places in Arabia to introduce Islam to them, but still with all the negative propaganda that was being spread by the Meccans, most of these people were not willing to listen to the Prophet ﷺ. So the opportunity to reach out was very limited in Mecca. But now in Medina, there was greater opportunity to reach out. and to convey the message of Islam to different people all over Arabia, and not only all over Arabia, but even outside Arabia. So the voice of Islam and the message of Islam was able to reach areas and places that it was not when Islam was in the Meccan phase or in the Meccan era. And that was an important step or a necessary step to spread the message of Islam to other parts of the world. The third difference that we see between the Meccan and the Medinan era is the armed conflict. We see in the Medinan era a number of battles taking place. In the Meccan era, there were no battles. Muslims were always at the receiving end. They were tortured, they were insulted, they were attacked. But now in Medina, the situation is different. They are in a position that they can stand for their right and defend themselves. So here came many of the battles that we read about in Islamic history. The Battle of Badr, the Battle of Uhud, the Battle of Khandaq with the Meccans, and many other battles that took place with the Bedouin tribes and some other enemies of Islam. All of these happened during the Medinian era. And these armed conflicts were not intended or were not conflicts that were initiated by Muslims, but most of them were conflicts that were initiated either by the Meccans or the Bedouins in the surrounding of Medina. And as I mentioned, Arabia was a dangerous place. If you cannot defend yourself as a community, you will be wiped out. Further to this, the Meccans were not satisfied that Muslims have left Medina, but have left Mecca, but they were conspiring and planning, and they have taken a number of steps to attack Muslims even when they were far away in Medina. And just to see how dangerous their surrounding was, the Prophet ﷺ, in two occasions, there was a betrayal by certain tribes where a man came to the Prophet ﷺ saying that we want to learn about Islam and people are interested, can you send some of your companions with us? And perhaps in the first case, the man did not have any ill intention. But what happened was, once those companions left Medina, and the first time, at one occasion, they were about more than 70. Once they arrived in certain locality, they were attacked and all of them were killed. In another incident also, another group of companions also went to another place to teach people the message of Islam, and they were all killed. So this shows us how dangerous the surrounding of Medina was, and that's why we see the importance of being able to self-defense and the importance of being strong so that nobody will come and dare to attack their city or prevent them from reaching out to other people with the message of Islam. So that's another difference that we see. Another difference also we see between Meccan and Medinian era is that in the Medinian era, Islam spread quickly. Thousands of people entered Islam. In the Meccan era, the number of people who entered Islam, even though it was a longer period, 13 years, more than 10 years, but if we look at both eras, then we will find that the overwhelming majority of people entered in Islam in the Medinian phase. And this is something that was mentioned in the Quran in Surah Al-Nasr, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. And this verse mentioned to the Prophet ﷺ that when you see that people coming to Islam, to the faith of Allah, afwaja, in large numbers, that you glorify Allah and ask for His forgiveness. And this is something that happened around the end of the Medinian phase, where you see large number of people coming to Islam. And on the 8th year of Hijrah itself, Mecca came under the domain of Islam. And by the time, by the end of the Hijrah era, by the time of the death of the Prophet ﷺ, Islam spread all over Arabia, every corner of Arabia, including Yemen. And this was one of the amazing accomplishments. One of the Western writers, Karen Armstrong, mentions that no one has accomplished in his life so much success as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, the Meccan era, even though the number of those who came to Islam were small, but this was the era where the core of the Muslim community was established, meaning that the great successes accomplished in Medina was built on the back of this core companions. The Meccan era was a very, very difficult era. But in this era, they were hardened. They saw hardship. Their commitment was tested. But they were very highly committed, and they were resolved to stand on what they have believed, and accordingly they were the core, the backbone of Islam throughout the history of Islam. And the great accomplishments that happened after Hijrah was founded on the back of these great companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and along with those who joined them later. So what we see, my dear brothers and sisters, here is how these two eras complement one another. The seeds that were put in place in the Meccan era started producing their outcomes or their fruits in the Medinan era. Prophet ﷺ, after accomplishing his mission, he left the world. But it's very interesting, my dear brothers and sisters, that rather than the message of Islam diminishing and becoming weaker, we find Islam reaching further corners in the world shortly after the Prophet ﷺ. And that's because he left behind him companions that he mentored, that he trained, companions who went through the difficult era of the Meccan era, and companions who were beside him in the Medinian era who learned so much from him, and they carried the message. Their loyalty was not to a person, but their loyalty were to the ideals, to the revelation that was revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's where they were able to succeed and accomplish what is considered by historical standards unprecedented and phenomenal success. Thank you very much for listening to me. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.